Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
It's crazy because as I have gotten older, there's a lot about the Batman mythos that has changed in the comic books, and a lot of people have defined their idea of Batman by like the '89 film, which is there's no problem with that, but there's a lot of things about the character that I'll call them casuals misunderstand. And that the comic book has sort of explored in a way that has other like Gotham has explored it more, but there's a lot more to these characters than you can explore in two hours a lot of times. So then when you have somebody who's as complex as Bruce Wayne, when you're looking at the movies, you're really only seeing the smallest sliver of these mythos that again, a movie is not really the best medium for storytelling, even though if the amount of money that studios put into films makes it feel like they're the best, when in reality they're kind of the best to get a quick slice, but as far as depth, it's not a really good way to tell a deep or broad story. And now I think we're starting to get into a time where directors and writers are given more leeway to take longer time to tell stories. Like Christopher Nolan had a 3 Batman story arc, whereas before you were limited and you're like, okay, you might get a sequel, but you have to keep it limited to this one film to tell the story. It has to be self-contained, because it might not be a success, and the studio's like, oh, we're not going to greenlight a sequel until you make X amount of dollars. Whereas the reason I think the Nolan trilogy worked and is so well standing against the test of time is because the story arc was never meant to be contained in one film and was always at least a 3-film story arc. And I think he had contained it. So it was like he wasn't trying to leave it open. The story he wanted to tell was 3 films, and it was like then he was done because that's the story he wanted to tell. And then when you get into these franchise approaches, it's like they want the story to be open so that they can extend the franchise forever, but they also want it to be self-contained because of budget expectations. So there's all these conflicting approaches with intellectual property creation that now like Marvel Studios and more so Warner Brothers is starting to remove as a restriction on the film producers, and it's resulting in way better film.
Yeah, you just reminded me of the most recent additions to Alien, where Ridley Scott creates. We know where the story goes. These are prequels, but he also was able to do something that hadn't really been done before. He went deeper into the mythos that defines the story. And I agree completely. I think that we're finally getting we're getting a DC universe that's more complete. We've talked about in the past how it seems like they're bridging the television's DC universe. I think they're in the video game universe itself, and it's all coming back to the comics. I'm really anticipating a live action Flashpoint.
Yeah, that's 100% confirmed, and I think with what they did with they did Flashpoint on the Flash TV show, and then they also did the Crisis on Infinite Earths. But in doing that, they tied the film universe in as canon and went through and tied in every single live action DC property into the live action universe. And in the process, by bringing in the voice actors from the animated series, and also the animated movies have used voice actors from the live action, they are completely tying those universes all together as a multiverse, where it does seem that the game properties and the animated properties are as valid in the multiverse canon as the comic books and the films. And this is where, when you have a multiverse in which the films, television shows, games, and comic books all exist in the same universe, then the stories become even more rich in a way that, because DC has had these inclinations for decades of telling these major story arcs, it's not something that just came up overnight that they're like, oh, we can make a ton of money off of this. This is actually the natural trajectory of the DC universe if you've been a comic book reader at all. And if you're following what's happening in the DC universe right now, it could very easily be setting up, like the comic books could very easily be setting up something that does include the films and the movies like very openly, because DC's all about breaking down the fourth wall in a way that is constructive to build a larger building that includes the fourth and fifth dimensions of the reader. So that's why, again, there are major elements of including the reader in the world building process that DC does that Marvel is starting to get into, but they're trying to make it seem like they started it when in reality it was DC like 40 years ago that's been doing that shit.
Yeah. Well, I think that, what is it? In the comics, Dr. Manhattan saves the original Flash, and that's the impetus for the whole, 52 universes for Earth.
Then Wally West has become, like, Dr. Manhattan gave up his power and he's dead now. So, I mean, this isn't a spoiler because if you don't know this, you're
gonna find out anyways.
But it's not spoiling anything. So effectively, because Dr. Manhattan has split his body, there's multiple people with Dr. Manhattan power running around, and Wally West is one of them, and Bruce Wayne is one of them, and it's like there's so much happening in the DC universe right now as to where they've got me excited. Like when I first started reading comic books, because I don't know if you guys have watched that Todd McFarlane documentary, but he acknowledges in that where in like 2004, 2005, it was peak exploitation for the industry where they're giving every character a number one, like the janitors of the fucking Avengers building had their own comic books series at that point. But that's the point of the idea of where they were going. They were exploiting the shit out of the readers, and everybody knew it. So a lot of people like myself just stopped reading the comics. And because the films were doing so well, it's not that comic sales stopped, but they started slumping because the readers did not enjoy being exploited. And the um, industry responded by starting to scale back its production, and now they're at a point where even though they just fired a bunch of people, it's not. I I don't like the fact that they just fired a bunch of people, but they became bloated to the point where this shit was going to be necessary in order for comics to get back to a point where um, the actual physical books are an artifact. Now, the only reason you need a comic book is if you want to like make sure if your power goes out that you're still able to read something. Otherwise, like I mean, because you can still even look at it on your cell phone. Digital comics and digital um the digital medium is the future of that, and that's where I'm like, as a reader, I have no problem acknowledging that as far as how this it enables storytelling on a different level.
Yeah.
That's it. I'm still purchasing comic books because it's a medium that I enjoy for the sake of nostalgia, and it's also there is the element of the industry's not keeping up with hiring and replacing the old writers and artists into new places. So they just fire them from the comic books and don't start putting them on video games or films or just moving them in the universe or in their production line. They just fire them because then they're like, oh, we need somebody who's written for a video game or somebody who's written for a movie instead of just taking the comic book writers and moving them.
That's always bothered me because the way that I've the way it makes sense to me is that a comic book is a storyboard that's already not just drawn out, but drawn out in excessive detail. And they already deliver all the lines and all of the turns of plot, the plot mechanisms, the long form story arc that can only be told through imagery. It's already all there.
But the problem is they're told in like 28 or 32 page increments. So
Yeah.
those episodes are more in line with the way television tells stories.
Sure.
So try to cut down like the Infinity Saga, for example, into a movie. You have to actually do it over the course of like 17 movies to do it right. Because if they tried to do it in 3 movies, everybody
Oh man.
would still be talking about how much it sucked.
Yeah, if they'd have tried to do any of the Infinity Gauntlet saga, any of it, any era of it in 3 movies, it would have been the most monumental failure. I even think they could have done it as a TV series and had it go for a solid, how many years it would take to get through all those movies. It feels like almost 20 years.
I mean, they had 4 seasons of the Silver Surfer TV show cartoon where they basically did the Infinity Saga, and that's
Yeah.
where
That was actually a really good cartoon.
it took like it was a really well written.
I think it was what I liked about it the most was that it seemed to be like an exploration of ethics, masked with comic book story theme, and I think that it may have actually been a little too high-minded for Saturday afternoon cartoon.
It still holds up.
It really does.
I can watch it. The dialogue is a little bad, but it's only because the subject matter is so high-minded. You're like, they wouldn't say this. This is like for kids, and you're like, oh yeah, it was for kids, but because again, they're talking about such philosophical and ethical conundrums and debates. It's like, whoa, a good thing the kids were learning this at the time, and that's how you end up with kids who grow up to question authoritative regimes because it's 100% correlated.
Yeah, I think that's actually been my favorite aspect of comic books is that they provide allegories and parables, things that people often turn to religion to find, but in a modernized context. So when you see a city, it looks like modern day New York or modern day Seattle or Denver or Phoenix or whichever city that they happen to be using as their model for whatever city it is. And the people look like they're dressed in contemporary styles. The vehicles kind of look familiar, and it's not so far off in the past that it forces you to take that giant suspension of disbelief, where it's like, oh yeah, I guess this still kind of applies because it's easier. It's just easier to relate to. I think that's one of those things that I find really interesting about the way that they're doing all of it now, especially because we get period pieces. We even get period pieces in video games, but they're doing this with such continuity between the various mediums that it's like you're saying, you can, if your power goes out, you can pick up a comic book and keep on going. But in a sense, one can go into a video game and experience that universe too. And I think that that's the kind of thing that's really going to push the development of the story. In a sense, the video game itself provides variations on the story, ways to test out mechanisms to deliver the story. I was watching this thing about Dead Space last night. Speaking of video games, they were talking about how when they were making it, they were trying to draw on elements of Resident Evil and their knowledge of various uh, first and third person shooters, and a lot of it seemed to be an effort to innovate. Where at some points they had to completely reanimate entire sections just because they needed to do something that was completely different. And in a sense, they were drawing from horror genres and action genres, telling a story that could be, well, telling multiple variations of the story depending on who was playing and how they were playing. And then they were incorporating aspects of the film industry, like with horror and sci-fi. There's so much of it that's based on the sound and the way the the sound design is incorporated into the action, into the scenes, into the story mechanisms. And I think that that's the kind of thing that we're really seeing. It's happening more than in just a limited range of storytelling. It's expanded, and we're getting even more. We're just getting more out of everything. I like to complain about how storytelling seems to have taken a fucking shit, but I think that when we can see a multimedia exploration of these stories, we're actually getting more than we ever asked for.
Yeah, because I just recently played the Avengers beta, and one thing that I really felt that they got right about that game was it's more than just playing a video game. They make it feel like you're when you're playing as Kamala Khan, it's your introduction onto a team, and you're like it's your first day on the Avengers team. So what's that feel like? And you're seeing what your room is like on the fucking helicarrier, and you're like, or yeah, because we're on a helicarrier in the first part, and there's all these things about the way that they create, like, oh, you can go look out the window and see the fucking base on the ground before you go start a mission, and go just explore the helicarrier, and like go look around the Avengers facility or Shield facility in order to get the feeling of actually being an Avenger before you go on a mission. And then I've seen a lot of complaints where people are like, oh, it's like Anthem. You just have this thing where you go on all these missions. And I'm like, what the fuck do you think being an Avenger would be like? Like, do you think being an Avenger is like, oh, you're sitting around kicking your feet up all the time? Like, no, they're doing all this unthankful shit constantly, but the movies are just a glimpse and a sliver of that, which is also why it gets back to why it's not a good medium for storytelling, because it's like, if you realize how many missions these people have to do, it's like, yeah, you don't want to see all of them because some of them are super fucking tedious, but that's where the video game comes in for the real hardcore people who want to go see the tedious missions where you're saving the Shield agents from a random facility in Boston or a random facility in California, because they're going to be coming under attack constantly. Like Shield, you stop a bad guy once, it's not like they're going to stop forever. That shit's going to happen fucking next week. And that's what that game feels like, where the people who are complaining about it don't understand real life or fake life, because again, they only want the slivers that movies give them, and they want them in these like quick Michael Bay cuts. and they don't want the character development where you have to, or you don't have to, you get to go around and look at the little shit on, you know, that's on the walls and look at the hall of trophies and go just look around and examine things for the sake of making it feel like a real world, because then the storytelling that you're saying went away, because it definitely went away. The only way to actually get that storytelling, it takes fucking time. You have to have a lot of time to unfold, to tell these super rich stories where you know what is in Kamala Khan's bedroom and how she decorates her room, because now you fucking know. You don't think that shit is important until you don't understand the things that drive the character, or the little nuances, or the type of their favorite bubblegum flavor, their favorite ice cream flavor. Because if you don't know those things, then that person doesn't seem real.
You bring up a really great point in that within the depiction of history, or the collection of historical events, either in the world of comics and imagination or in reality, oftentimes history is longitudinal, and it can be presented longitudinally as a collection of a series of events that may, in immediate succession, not necessarily play out well in terms of how a story is told. And this holds true for real life in terms of how historical events are depicted in the media or in an educational environment, either in the public or private school arena. And then also in comics, some story arcs may seem a little bit hackneyed or redundant in the short term in comparison to what they're following or what preceded them. However, 20 years later or down the line, those events have occurred, and those events are part of the universe and the historical record of that particular reality, which can then allow for those events to be called upon or referenced within the continuum. And the stories can be very, very large and broad and expansive and transcend various dimensions, or the stories can be small or more focused on individual variations of characters and their personal interests.
Yeah, and that's one of the places where I think Zack Snyder is getting a ton of undue flack for his variations on these characters, because what ends up happening is there's some people who have only seen the Christopher Reeve Superman, and in their heads, that's what Superman is. There's nothing wrong with that approach to Superman as a character, because that is a valid viewpoint of that individual character. However, the Superman mythos is much larger in that the multiverse has multiple Supermans. And I feel like the same people who complain about Zack Snyder giving a different iteration didn't watch Smallville, which is all about the wholesome life of Clark Kent growing up before he becomes actual Superman. So there's all these elements of, not just even in the comic books, they've explored so many different versions of this character who was originally a Moses illusion, that is a reference to Nietzsche's Übermensch, in that he's also representing Jewish people who want to feel empowered, but also in creating this character also want to identify as regular people who feel as if they're aliens. So the whole origin of Superman as a character is an immigrant story that is directly an allusion to Moses, not Jesus. So when you have these people who then try to undermine that aspect of the character and say, oh, I want the Christopher Reeve truth, justice, in the American way, that's not actual Superman. That's like, that's one version of Superman that does not define the actual Superman mythos to the point. In the comic books and in the video games, there is a storyline called Injustice, which explores the, we'll call it the reciprocal lore of Superman in the it's old enough now that if you haven't read it, you don't actually care about comics. So this is technically not a spoiler because they're already on Injustice 2. In this universe, the Joker basically makes Superman go mad thinking and makes him think Lois is Doomsday, and Superman kills Lois because he's driven mad by Joker. So after he realizes that he just killed his pregnant mother of his child by his own hands, he goes and then rips Joker's heart out. So then the whole thing explores what happens when Superman loses his fucking mind, and there's a whole universe dedicated to exploring this mythos in direct contradiction to the one we know, which exists now. They've explored that universe even further. So this universe got created in the DC multiverse, and now it's canon in the DC multiverse. This Superman exists. So when we're talking about, oh, you only have one version of Superman, these are people who don't read the comic books. They don't get to decide how we define these characters, because then this is like one of these elements of Zack Snyder getting undue hate for making callbacks to comic books. It's like he referenced Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns. He referenced Injustice. He referenced Flashpoint. He referenced all these books and storylines that if you hadn't read them, it's going to be like, well, what the fuck is he doing with this? It's like those people end up making it a necessity to then have this conversation, because I don't necessarily, care for Zack Snyder, but then I'm saying what he's doing is referencing comic books. He's not just coming up with this stuff and saying, oh, I'm going to make a Superman immigrant story about him being an alien, because that's been there the entire time. But the people who want to make it a story about a white dude in America don't understand that aspect.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just thinking, like, in was it Man of Steel? It was one of the newer Superman movies when Jonathan Kent gets killed by the tornado. I thought, I was like, what? Now we don't get to have like old man Kent giving his son like words of wisdom. Because I remember one storyline where Clark is having, he's basically depressed. Superman shouldn't be depressed, and his dad gives him advice, like fatherly advice, and it's one of the most like clear cut. They didn't do anything except meet that kind of standard of the kind of advice one expects from their father figure. And now that doesn't get to happen. But it occurred to me, there's a multiverse, and there's a different universe where that happens. There's a different Earth where that conversation still gets to take place.
But here's the thing, that conversation doesn't get to take place. But the one he's referencing is what he was trying to set up that he did not get to set up, was the Death of Superman storyline, where Jonathan Kent helps Clark back from the dead. He guides him through the underworld.
Yeah.
And this is like, that's the one I think Snyder was setting up, but because his cut didn't get made, or it didn't get made to fruition, then it just looks like Jonathan Kent died for no fucking reason. But because, like, I know the seeds that Zack Snyder was laying, we were going to get Kevin Costner helping Kal-El through the underworld journey, which was probably going to be a full hour at least of screen time, where he's like in the underworld, and maybe even meeting Jor-El, like, because I think in the comic book, I forget if he met Jor-El or not, but Jonathan Kent like literally guides fucking Clark back from the dead into reality. So that storyline would have been fucking awesome. But you only get that if Jonathan dies. And how do you kill Jonathan like in 5 hours of screen time and make it worth something? So that's where I'm like, I feel like he was going in that specific direction. But again, when he had, I don't know if a lot of people realize the whole reason Snyder had to step away was because of a death in the family by suicide, where it was like there was really he couldn't fucking keep going. There's no reason for him to actually keep going to make the Justice League when that shit happens. So I understand in the point of the trajectory of the movies why he had to step away, but the film studio should have stopped production and halted it instead of bringing in Joss Whedon. They didn't do that, and that's how we got the fucking crappy Justice League. And now we're years later getting to reset the story in a way where now, like, I may get that speculation validated, but regardless, it's clear that there was a larger story that Snyder was trying to set up. So he wasn't just going to kill Jonathan Kent for no reason. Like, there's no universe in which Zack Snyder is doing things on screen for no reason, and now we know that. So that's where I'm like, you know, I was not happy with that. It was a stupid death in the theatrical version.
Yeah.
Knowing now what, you know, Snyder's original vision was, it's like, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, knowing that he wasn't going to do anything for no reason. So that's where I'm like, again, I just want to see the story that he was trying to tell for the larger DC multiverse. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
In regards to how Superman is a archetype, or even to an extent a prototype, because there are so many iterations of the character that are allowed to exist within the DC multiverse, there was an issue of Superman, and I'm not entirely sure which iteration of Superman it was or which Earth it was, but Superman was a ruler of hell for this issue, or for a specific period of time. And it just shows how you can have an amalgamation of these principles that sort of invert the character's original intent, or even demonstrate the strength of a character within a mythos. And it allows for the crossover, the carryover, even earlier on, before the CW crossovers of the characters that reside in the DC Universe iteration of Hell, and creates the opportunity for those types of interactions.
It's The Beast from Krypton, Superman 666, issue 666.
Yeah, because then there's also Quantum Superman from Earth 4, who is, one of his powers is superposition. So he's able to break the fourth wall and talk directly to the reader. So there's all these things. They're doing shit with these different variations of Superman, where it's Prime 1 million. There's like all these different Supermans, but again, that's part of what they're doing with the multiverse mythos, to say, yeah, it would be a very limiting character, like, perspective. Because even the Red Sun Superman, that, like, the notion of if he had just landed in a fucking different country, how different he turns out. You know, clearly the notion of an alien sent here from a different planet landing in the United States is oh, is that fake news or propaganda? Because I'm gonna say it sounds like, of all places, when there's like at the time probably 3 billion other places, or 3 billion other people on the planet, him landing in America on not necessarily even the largest landmass itself is just kind of improbable, to the point where obviously you have to suspend belief for that. But then when you're like, oh, this is the only version of Superman that we get, it's like, well, that's a really limited view of the character. Just put him on a different continent. Let's start from there. And the Red Sun Superman is a fucking amazing storyline too, what in the comics and the animated movie, because they even did that storyline on the Supergirl TV show. What was the Red Daughter?
Yeah. I really enjoyed Red Sun. I think that Red Sun is the kind of alternate Superman that it stands out to me because, you know, being socialized in the West, it's hard to tell what the interests are in Russia. But when you get through that story, by the end of it, you realize that he was essentially always the same person. He wanted, you know, justice. He wanted peace. He wanted equality. He just had a different set of motivations to get to those places. It's hard to. I think there are a lot of things that are lost in translation when it comes to cultural differences, but these things can be bridged. We have that's what storytelling is for, I think.
Well, and even then, I think the story used to be about when we're talking about the Ubermensch mythos,
Mm.
it's effectively a Superman. But as the character grew and the comic books gave him more and more power, the story started to be a God among men story,
Yeah.
which is it's a completely different story altogether. And that's where when we start to look at the Zack Snyder God among men version, that's where it's not it's not the same story as the one they were telling in the 8 or 79 or whatever,
The comic.
the first movie with
Oh,
Christopher Reeve.
God, I feel like we're so far away from that version of Superman. We might as well be talking about Silver Age Superman or Golden Age Superman. I I,
They
ju- I,
killed him.
I just don't see Christopher Reeve Superman as Superman anymore.
Even down to they killed him off in the comic books and brought him back and had him evolve into a different Superman. And then on Smallville, he fucking gave up his powers and got married and has kids. So that version of Superman has been retired by the lore and the mythos. We're at a point because they brought him back for the Infinite Earth, the Crisis on Infinite Earths, but it was like because he had no powers, it was basically a symbolic Superman, which is obviously the character is symbolic in itself, and that's why the representation was so genius when they're like, hey, this version of Superman is no longer powerful, but we're going to use him as a symbol of the past in this storyline. That's some genius storytelling to me.
Yeah.
Not, oh, I want to redo the same Superman and have him be truth, justice, in the American way. Like, that shit is you can't have that in 2020 where the justice in America is cops beating the shit out of people. That doesn't work.
Yeah, that story is a lot darker than we think. It's Superman showing up and beating the crap out of some police. Like that.
Which
That's more of a Batman story.
yeah.
I mean
Yeah.
that is a Batman story. Bruce beating the crap out of some police because they're in his way while he's chasing some actual criminals.
And I don't know if anybody's seen the actual the what is it? I think it's the theatrical or ultimate edition of Batman vs Superman. But in that, you can see Zack Snyder he's directly questioning American justice because the whole reason that the theatrical release sucked is because they took out the part where it shows American military fucking up through imperialism, and then Superman comes in and saves them, and then they try to blame it on him. So that's where the whole that movie was supposed to be Superman um, saving people from American imperialism in other countries as the premise for why Lex Luthor and the government were trying to vilify him. But because the United States government brought issue with it, they cut that shit from the theatrical release. So then we got this toned down version that's not questioning America at all, actively removing any sort of subversion of military authority, making it seem like the military is 100% competent, when in reality the premise of that film was based on imperialism and military and law enforcement incompetence as the subject matter.
One thing I enjoyed about Batman versus Superman is that they seem to take reference to the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns, which is part of the Year One continuity, where it's old man Bruce and the president, I think it's Reagan, sends Superman in to arrest him, and if he doesn't go peacefully, take him out. And there's this element of Superman's just doing what he's told, and so in a way they kind of strip him of his ability to perceive when he's being lied to, or maybe he actually understands that Bruce is gone rogue and has gone rogue for some time. But there's a moment in that movie where Superman embodies imperialism at that point, and it's like kind of soul crushing. But it was really good for the story because it gives us this variation of Clark, of Superman, being manipulated, and so he's not infallible. In a sense, I think that makes him more believable. That if Batman has problems, so do the superheroes, so do the other superheroes. They can't all be like, glowing rays of sunshine 24/7. But the thing that got me about that, actually, the Dark Knight Returns, I think at one point Superman makes the decision to not go after Bruce and go stop like a nuclear bomb or something like that, and it almost kills him. And then he lands on the Earth and he just saps the power from the surrounding grass, and it restores him. He's like the zombie version of himself, practically.
Yeah, they did direct calls to all that
Yeah,
in the movies.
yeah. Aren't we getting a Year One TV show?
I'm not sure if it's a Year One or if it's like a cop Gotham PD.
Oh yeah, Gotham PD TV show is going to be set during Batman's Year One. Okay, it's going to be on HBO Max. It's a TV series, is a prequel set in Year One. Well, that's good. I knew I read something about getting a new Year One, but it had been delayed because of pandemic.
Yeah, because I mean, it's like I hope they're just extending the Gotham universe because otherwise, then it's like it's not anything new because Gotham just ran for 5 seasons, but it's like right now in the midst of police people questioning the meaning of police. I feel like that is an unnecessary series. Like nobody needs another. Like we got Gotham, and yeah, let's get another story rather than something about the police force where it's like romanticizing. Because I don't know if you watch Gotham at any point, but they regularly beat the shit out of suspects when they're interrogating them, and it's like totally romanticizing that shit, and that's how we end up with people, who it's like it seems innocuous when you're watching it, but that's where I'm like, man, I as somebody who's a huge Jim Gordon fan as a character, like I don't. It's only because he questions authority within the context of the cops. He's like not representative of a normal cop. So I'm not trying to have like as a comic book fan, there's no reason for me to get into another police drama right now. I just don't. I don't need that in my life. But I'm probably not gonna watch it. I need, like Stargirl. Stargirl is a fucking amazing TV show, and I watched it. Like I had no Starman and JSA. I wasn't really into those characters before because they're not from our generation. But now
Is the season over yet?
Yeah.
Oh, good. I can start it.
Over. They're definitely doing a season 2, so it's like, now I'm looking at characters that they're reviving and giving new context and telling new stories. Like one of the stories they told during season 1 was about revenge porn, man. They're telling relevant stories for our time for like the characters. You know, what happens when you have superpowers and somebody fucking puts out revenge porn about you and you have the capacity to go fucking end their life. That's the type of story they're telling in 2020 where I'm like, that shit is interesting. That shit is up to date. And it's using these characters and their powers in a way that is making social commentary, but also giving us good character development and also something believable. Those things all have to be present to me to make a good story that is also believable. Um, but
Yeah, I've been passively ignoring it. Like I see ads for it, and I see that I can stream it, but I've been trying to just wait for that season to end because I'm not terribly familiar with Stargirl, but I remember seeing Stargirl and Starman appear in the animated movies, and so I know that she exists. I'm just curious. I just don't want to, me, man. I don't like piecemealing this stuff. I'll watch the entire series over a weekend and actually enjoy myself.
yeah, and that's just like like I don't know if you watch Lucifer,
I loved that show.
but that shit's canon in the DC universe now. Like they had Lucifer on the Crisis on Infinite Earths where Constantine
Mm,
uh, went and got a token from him or some shit, and it's
yeah,
like they're doing so much. Stargirl is 100% canon,
yeah.
where they're in a different universe, obviously, but the universe they're in, I think, is the one that's going to be tied in with uh I don't know if it's the Dark or Justice League Dark.
Well, we've got a
Um,
couple. We've got a couple animated movies of that, right?
right, but they're doing a live action Justice League Dark
Oh, sweet.
supposedly,
So
because what
cool.
what ended up happening is they made a Swamp Thing TV show.
Yeah.
Didn't do well at first, but they're bringing it back, and there's a potential for a season 2 because ultimately Swamp Thing is part of Justice League Dark. So when we're talking about the magic Justice League and you need Constantine and shit like that, I think they're still saying the old Constantine TV show is canon because Constantine is on the Legends of Tomorrow now. So they're doing all of these things seemingly to try to weave the universe together in a way that, when you have such a rich narrative and such a rich history to it, it does, that's why we're getting Michael Keaton back, is because they've been able to make a story and make it in such a way that they can bring Michael Keaton back onto the big screen and have it fucking make sense in 2020. That shit is going to be mind blowing because they already brought back his Gotham already made an appearance on the CW. So
So, Are we getting Batman Beyond then? It's confirmed.
it's not confirmed, but it's more than likely. I think what we're getting is a version of Batman Inc.
Oh,
Um, so that's what to me is more likely than Batman Beyond right now on the big screen, because I think it's either going to be Batman Inc. or like the current multiverse story where we might even end up with like a full-on evil Bruce Wayne that is a villain that is in the larger DC universe. Like I think that's more likely than anything for the long term, because the shit they're doing in the comic books now, exploring the dark Bruce Waynes, like there was the Merciless and then the Batman Who Laughs, and now the Darkest Night after Manhattan. There's like, I mean, then there's even more. There's a fucking Tyrannosaurus Rex version of Bruce Wayne. There's a monster truck version, and that's what um, you know the doing in the comic books also being tied in with the live action shit lends itself to some really crazy stories that Marvel is the MCU is doing awesome shit, but in reality DC is the one that started all this shit back in the day in a way that again Marvel is playing catch up, but only the real heads know that shit.
well, Marvel has Disney money to work with, so they can go hog wild. They don't have to tell those stories that way. They just have access to all the Imagineers and all that technology. It makes it easier to tell that variation of story or engage in that variation of storytelling. I don't think that the MCU would make as much sense if they were actually trying to do what DC is doing. They just, I don't think that the characters have that kind of, at least not the way they've been presented. I don't think they have that kind of depth the way they've been presented to us.
Yeah, and I think even the Netflix properties were probably the first iteration of Marvel characters where we really started to get in that depth.
Yeah.
In the way that DC was doing, or again, just mainly because DC has so many television properties on the CW that, you know, I think now what I'm starting to realize is what DC has really done well with is separating which properties are for children, which properties are for teenagers, and which properties are for adults. And in doing that, but also weaving those stories together, is how you get stories where the Teen Titans are actually Teen Titans on a show for kids that ends up with them growing up into the Titans television show that's 100% for adults that no kid should ever be watching.
Yeah. Raven is not for children.
Good Lord, that show is fucking amazing, but I would question anybody who lets a child watch that TV show just because it happens to be comic book character superheroes.
Also, if we look at the evolution of the Lucifer character within the DC world, being introduced in various iterations, but I'd like to focus for a moment on the one that appears in the Sandman universe series, and that's in Vertigo Comics, which is a part of DC.
Yeah, that's the OG version.
Yeah. So we have the Lucifer Morningstar that appears in interactions with the Endless characters, which is, you know, Sandman, which is Dream, or Death, Despair, etc., Destiny. And from that character, we generated a significant amount of Vertigo storylines that told the story of Lucifer and his interactions with the universe itself and with divine characters and with, you know, Abrahamic and various other religious icons. And then from that, we seem to also have an interconnection with the Constantine character, because the Hellblazer Constantine also has a connection to the Vertigo DC Comics universe. And there are certain scenes within the Lucifer Morningstar book compilations that have Constantine waiting in Lucifer's restaurant for an audience or for just an opportunity to briefly interact with that character. So then we have the CW and other iterations of Lucifer, which is essentially the Constantine that we see, that is not the Keanu Constantine, but the one with the blonde hair that we see in the CW, as well as Legends of Tomorrow.
Ryan.
Right. And then we also have the Lucifer character that doesn't exactly resemble either in demeanor or in outward physical appearance the Lucifer that we see in the Vertigo comics, but there are similarities in regards to the characters that he interacts with, like his friend Mazikeen, his consort, who in the comics is a disfigured entity and who prefers to appear disfigured and outwardly unaesthetic to typical human preferences and perceptions. So that also brings me to the query or the conjecture of, is there within the DC universe a difference in how the character of Lucifer and these divine-based characters, how they're represented, and a different underpinning or substrate that determines the creation origins of each universe within the multiverse? And it also begs the question, what was it that Lucifer Morningstar within the Vertigo comics was flying towards the very end, because these have all been out for years, towards the very end of the final book, which was basically Infinity. And what exactly was he looking for? Was it the source of all universes or the source of all creations, and the denial of the single God creating one universe and the creation of all universes?
Yeah, I think that's definitely valid in that they could easily tie that into the live action films or live action universe as to where he went, or one of the places that a version of him went. Because even in the there's a lot of allusion to the comics in the Lucifer television show. For example, they have Mazikeen wearing that half mask that she did in the comics in the show, but I don't think she's ever. She may have a demon half face at one point, like maybe for an episode. If I have to go back and watch season 1. But they definitely do a lot of allusions down to one of the characters that got completely written out. Like, what was her name? Ellen, I forget the.
Was it Elaine Belloc?
Yeah, she gets completely written out, but they sort of replace her in the TV show with Trixie. Sort of with Trixie, but also with Chloe, because then I think this was smart in that the way that character her story evolved in the comic books would have been super weird to do in a TV show, as like Lucifer as the protagonist and a fucking dead teenager girl as his sidekick. Like, that would have easily had a bunch of Christians protesting it. But somehow this show has been on for five seasons without Christians throwing a fit. And I think it's because the TV show treads those lines. Like, there's an entire Lucifer goes on a rant talking shit about Satanists. So there's all these things that I think they do in the show, knowing that they have to be 2 steps ahead of this reactive Christian right who's never actually going to watch the show, but is going to protest anytime they step anywhere near what's perceived to be a landmine.
Well, and that also falls within the canon of the character's demeanor, in the sense that the character within the Vertigo comics would literally talk shit about anybody. I mean, it didn't really matter. He kind of cut to the quick on the underpinnings of anybody's perceptions or personality or personal history and biases, and used those in order to affect his own ends or his own desires and goals. And he basically had his goal from the very beginning of the very first book. And we were only kind of given hints based off of the characters that he encountered and how he reacted to them or adjusted his path to those interactions, but at the same time also getting the idea that he sort of anticipated interacting with people like that. So the fact that, so it's also kind of meta in that sense, that the character is also sort of anticipating criticism from, people who would, initially protest, and then providing, basically a basis for a criticism, or a criticism of himself that's also sort of veiled and one-dimensional or multi-dimensional, depending on how you look at it, just so that way there would be fodder. But he's never really clear about what he believes actually, except for his own self-determination. And I think another one of the reasons why the character on the TV show or in the live action series is well received is because they sort of flipped the outward presentation of the character and made him a bit more sassy, a bit more trickster-like, overtly trickster-like, and then that kind of makes it obvious. Oh, this guy is a bit of an anti-hero. This guy is a demon, so he's acting like a demon. Whereas in the comics, it's literally meant to be kind of deceiving, and you have to read each page very clearly and very closely within the lines to basically be like, oh, this character is not really doing this for the better of this particular individual, or this character deliberately omitted these characteristics of the contract that he was entering into, because that's the trickster within the character, but it goes so much deeper than that. And I think the audience needs to be, if it's going to be broadly reached in terms of a live action audience, then there needs to be some familiarity with what the audience is used to interpreting or interacting with conceptually from a more conservative or right or neo Christian perspective of what that character is or what that archetype is.
I didn't want to like not give Maxwell a chance to add to the topic because, man, like, you've been patient as hell. So,
I mean, I'm not really super familiar with comic books, and the only like especially DC stuff I've seen is what is it? The Christopher Nolan Batman movies, and I think I saw the second Tim Burton one, the one with Danny DeVito in it. But other than that, like, I'm completely like just new to the whole. I've never, like, except for I think I read a little bit of V for Vendetta, a little bit of Watchmen, but other than that, like, I've not even seen a comic book in reality. But I've learned a lot of interesting things. Like, I was not aware of the monster truck Bruce Wayne. That's interesting. But the only thing I really had to add at any point was when you guys, like, at the very beginning, were talking about the new Batman movie with Robert Pattinson in it, is that, you know, he gets a lot of shit for, you know, being the Twilight guy or whatever, but like I mean, you know, you can't, a good actor can't make a bad script work that well. So I kind of have my doubts on, you know, him being a bad actor, but after seeing him in The Lighthouse, I was like, oh yeah, he could handle Batman. Like, he's a pretty good actor. It's just, you know,
That's the one with
Twilight
Willem
was a
Dafoe,
really
right?
shit role. Yeah,
Okay.
it's like in black and white.
Yeah. No, that was a really strange movie. I remember trying to watch it and thinking, it's like, where is this going? Like, I had no idea. It was, but I couldn't stop watching it.
I know, it's hypnotic in a way, and it's also kind of like a little fun brain challenge to try and figure out what the fuck Willem Dafoe is saying half the time.
I feel like that's Willem Dafoe in every movie, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Robert Pattinson's definitely going to probably be the best Batman we've seen yet. I've never even seen one of his films, but based on his devotion to character fidelity, I think that's where, like, I've seen interviews with him in real life where, as a person, he seems to care very much more about being like in the story and telling the story from his character's perspective than making money. And that's where I'm like I said, I've never seen one of his films, but I think before, like, I've been saying something makes me feel like he's going to be the best Batman we've seen yet. And after seeing that trailer, I feel 100% validated, because what I noticed immediately is, I don't know if he's doing the choreography or doing the stunts. Like, I doubt he's doing all of them, but there's probably some where you actually see him doing the stunts. But whoever did the choreography, they did such a good job of showing, like, what I always think about when I think of Batman is somebody who's driven by visceral rage. His body is not what gives him his actual strength. It's his actual internal rage and desire to get vengeance. And what I saw in that trailer was that feeling in a way that I've never seen before, except when Christian Bale was yelling at people. There's a few times when Christian Bale was yelling at people that shit came out, but that's just because Christian Bale sounded like he was an angry ass person in real life. Like,
Yeah.
so I feel like Robert Pattinson is channeling this shit as a great actor rather than just being an angry person in a way where I'm looking at that, like, you know, the way he's throwing those punches. If you've never trained in martial arts, you're not going to notice it, but he's putting his soul into each punch, where it's like something that an actor being able to do that and express that is a different level of expression, where I'm like, we're going to see some shit in this film that we've never seen before concerning exploring Bruce Wayne and Batman as emotional studies. Because again, we're seeing an action scene, but I'm seeing emotion expressed through violence. And it's like, it's super subtle, but when, like, now that I've pointed it out, like, I think people will see it. Cause again, it's like somebody did a side-by-side shot of the Batfleck. There's clearly a scene reference that the Matt Reeves Batman is doing to the Batfleck Batman, but the level of visceral emotion and anger that is displayed in these like few seconds is so high level that, again, I'm thinking this is going to be probably the best Batman film we've ever seen, in a way that is like I don't know if our minds are prepared for it, because it's going to be such high level storytelling where you're gonna have to watch it like 3 times to really grasp what you just saw.
Well, it looks so deep. It allows for such depth, and with the level of emotional response and investment that the directing and that the acting are allowing for, as well as the cinematography, as well as the depth of the antagonists that were shown within the trailer, I think it allows for a definite opportunity for expansion and continual storytelling for this particular character. And yes, that combat, I was actually very impressed with the choreography and with the obvious training that Robert Pattinson had put in order to execute those techniques and work with the stunt team in order to accomplish that feeling. And then combined with the directing showing the responses of the people associated with the person on the receiving end of the beating, really helped drive the entire scenario home.
Well, and it's funny you say the reactions, because I've seen discussions before of people who are talking about flashy martial arts moves and things that go beyond necessity. And what I've seen as the common explanation from high-level martial artists is that those things are meant to shock anyone in the local vicinity and make them think twice about coming at you, or like make them rethink their decisions concerning if they want to actually fight you. And that type of reaction that Matt Reeves is showing also then gives, it's not even validation, it's an expression of he clearly contacted high-level martial artists and people who've dealt with street fight scenarios that are real-life situations where again, the difference between a trained martial artist and a real person, like a regular person, is there is a Grand Canyon between those two people and how they're going to react, and seeing someone like act as violent as Robert Pattinson is in those trailers. Like if that shit starts happening to someone like next to you, to a regular person in real life, 9 out of 10 people are just gonna freeze up and not know what the fuck to do, because it's like one of these things where, again, it's until you've been there in real life, it's all hypothetical. And a lot of people talk about, oh, I do this and that. Well, until you're there, you don't know. And what happens is your body goes into fight or flight mode. And if you've never trained, you're hit with so many options that it paralyzes you. And if you don't know, like, what's the best course of action, you don't do anything. And this is how people end up in these situations where there's like a fucking car careening at them and it's out of control, and you see these people freeze up, and it's like, it's not that they didn't have time to react or didn't see the car coming. It's that when they have so many options and have never trained for something like that, their body and mind literally freeze up and don't know what to do. So that's something that actually happens in real life. So that's where it's like, when you see these movies where there's one person who's doing some super devastating shit and other people freeze up, it's not fiction. That shit's real. And that's where that type of directing and fidelity to that type of situation is how you get something that is so cinematically shocking and emotionally jarring, but also believable, because what they're doing is based on like referencing what they've learned from experts. But you know, I think again, this is where we're at a time, we've seen so many bad choreographed fight scenes. Like everybody remembers that double punch from those Star Trek TV shows where
The
like
baseball bat swing.
yeah, it would never work in real life. And the person who had done the choreography has now come out and said, yeah, we just liked the way it looked, and no one would ever do this in real life. So there's, you know, if you go and look at the Next Generation fight scene choreography, it's fucking horrible. It's terrible. So there's periods in film and television where we were subject to really, really bad fight choreography, but now we're at a time where they put so much time and effort into making these things look real, but also interesting. That again, it's like the Robert Pattinson like 3-second fight scene is better than anything that came out in the fucking 90s. Like maybe there's like one movie that I can't think of that had okay choreography, but there's just these periods in Western cinema history where the fight choreography is just so terrible because they haven't, like, it's weird to think of a time when America has not really been exposed to martial arts, but before the 40s and 50s, effectively, there's no real martial arts culture in America. So people fighting is just wild winged punches and like grabbing collars and winging wild punches. That's all American fighting is before the exposure to martial arts, which is, it's just crazy to think about in 2020 when we have UFC and Bellator damn near every weekend.
But it's also, in regards to the history of martial arts in America, we also want to consider the evolution of boxing tactics from the bare knuckle arena. They did also have winging punches, but there were also manuals that illustrated particular defensive techniques and sort of tying techniques that carried on into the more trained arenas, or for people who actually spent time researching those techniques. And there were like really dirty tactics and things that people would employ, but it wasn't for the common person.
Well, but a lot of those clean techniques you're talking about were coming from Cuba. and Cuban boxers. So it's like, there is the British fisticuffs where, obviously those dudes have their style, but those dudes weren't following a ton of rules. So it's like, that's why it's like even the British fisticuffs are super, savage. Like if they got a chance to bite you, they're gonna fucking bite you. And it's not like, oh, we're doing this for honor and I'm never gonna punch you in below the belt. Like, no, they'll punch you below the belt, rip out your fucking hair, anything. It's not necessary. It's like about inflicting pain, and there are forms and techniques at this time for sure. But again, that's where there's a whole really crazy evolution of fighting in the West that, again, when you look at the films and the comic book evolution, it's reflected in how like qualitatively bad the choreography is compared to how good it is now. It's just we're spoiled in our exposure to different types of martial arts, and knowing how well those things work against other martial arts in practice, to know when we're seeing bad choreography. And again, it's like I love where we're at for media. But then we get, okay, so this is, I think, a good point. So you get these video games where there's like sword play, and some of them are more accurate to real life, where it's like one shot, one kill, if it's like a good shot, or you may get in these sword battles. Like, this is where shit like Dark Souls is, it's super difficult because you can't play it like a video game where you can get hit all the time and not die because you're going to take a potion. It's like, no, if you die, like this is closer to like a real life approach where, like, shit, if you die, you lose all your shit and you got to like go back to square one effectively. So you better pay attention and make sure you don't get fucking cut unnecessarily. And that's like a more, it's not a simulation necessarily, but when you're playing a video game where people are waving swords and you're getting hit like 17 times and taking potions and shit like that, it doesn't really give you the effect of what it would be like to actually do or be involved in a sword battle. And this is where
That's the 80s model for engagement.
Yeah.
Jean-Claude Van Damme gets the crap beat out of him for 20 minutes, and then somehow he gains the strength to like beat his adversary who he hasn't touched for 20 minutes.
Whereas you have these other, like Ghost of Tsushima or Sekiro, where if you get hit like one or two times, or maybe 3 times at most, you're dead. And it's like, yeah, that's you can't really be getting hit 17 times with a fucking katana and like still fighting back. That's just some unbelievable movie shit that then we're sold. So that's when you go back and forth between these games. It's hard to be fair when the more difficult games are just properly reflecting what it would actually be like to be in a sword battle.
Well, that also reminds me of difficulty levels in games like Mortal Kombat or Street Fighter. I mean, of course, there's the suspension of disbelief. There's the fantasy. There's the fact that, you take a hit from a blade of some kind to your neck and you're not immediately dead. But I believe that some of the difficulty levels, even for games like Mortal Kombat dating back to the 90s, if you got hit with a specific technique at a higher difficulty level, it would like immediately reduce your capacity to like last longer, or it would take away like a significant level of your health. And not every fighting game was like that. Like, it was more incremental, or it took longer, or it just made the tactic. If you raise the difficulty level, it would just raise the complexity of the tactics that your computer opponent would take against you, as opposed to the severity of the technique.
You want to say something, Maxwell?
Oh yeah, sorry, I was waiting to see if anybody else had anything to say. Yeah, what sorry. I just wanted to add in that talking about in like games like Dark Souls and Sekiro and Bloodborne, how you can't take much damage before you die. That's something that I've really always appreciated about the games, is that like even like the weakest enemy in like Dark Souls 1, just a completely hollow, pink, like almost completely naked zombie with like a broken sword can kill you in like less than 10 hits, like if you've like been maxing out your HP really high. And it's just a matter of, it's not like, the typical RPGs, especially like JRPGs, it's like, the bigger the numbers, if you have bigger numbers than your opponent, you're going to win. But then you have games like Dark Souls and all the other, there are games that FromSoft has made since then, where you can be as overpowered as you want, and you'll still get just completely wrecked, like by gravity or just getting ganged up on and not being cautious enough. Or you can take the opposite route and just decimate everything with like taking no damage throughout the entire game, and like beat the entire thing using like a soup ladle or something really stupid like that. And it's just it's difficult, but it's mostly fair. I mean, there's a lot of dumb things in throughout all the games that are pretty unfair. Like in the first game, the Bed of Chaos comes to mind because it's just a really poorly designed puzzle boss. But like it's difficult, but its fairness, it's like, even though it does have, you can level up stats and everything, it still is mostly about skill over, your numbers and stuff.
Well, and that's what I appreciate, because, what I've realized is in real life, I've been training in martial arts for a very, very long time. And one of the reasons I've been doing it is just so I can get faster, to be as fast as humanly possible in this body. So then when I play a video game, I want that video game character to be as fast, or if not faster than me in real life. And if my button latency doesn't reflect that shit pisses me off. But what ends up happening is those are like really good about creating no latency between your controller and character response. So if you hit dodge at the right time, you're going to fucking dodge out of the way. So if you wait until the last second, the last microsecond, and you hit dodge, you're not going to get hit because there's zero latency. That's the shit where you have these games that are then reflecting those types of people, because there's Floyd Mayweathers. There are people in real life who can sit in front of a person and be so much faster that they wait until that other person throws a punch, and they're fast enough to dodge out of the way and then throw a punch, or throw a punch that lands before that other person's punch lands. So there are these people that exist in real life that are aberrations in physical limitations that then can surpass everybody else, to the point where this man gets into a ring and wins 50 boxing matches and loses 0 because he's a microsecond or a nanosecond faster than everybody else that's like a professional. So that's where I want that to be reflected in these games, because I'm supposed to be taking on the mantle of one of these people as my character. These aren't just average people. These are supposed to be that exceptional individual who is the Hellblade, or is the one that's going to take on the fucking demons in Dark Souls or the monsters or whatever. And that's why I don't want these characters to be average when I'm doing something that's fiction, and that's where like these stories are. Because what I realized is like I played Devil May Cry 5, and I've been recording my gaming, and I went back and watched it, and I realized like I didn't get hit for like 15 minutes, and it's like, well, if you're this character who's this person who's got the demon infused like weapons or whatever, that person shouldn't be getting hit for 15 minutes. So that's completely in line with if my reaction time in the real world gives me the capacity to control this supernatural person in a way that then becomes beyond like what a human could do in real life, that's the type of experience I'm looking for, because I can't do that shit in real life. So there's this of, if I can combine my reaction speed that I've attained in the real world into a fictional world that gives me the capacity to then exploit this real world speed, but only if I'm good enough, because if I don't exploit that speed, I'm going to die in one hit. And this is where the fun comes from in those games of being like, oh, you have a microsecond, nanosecond window to do something, and you did it. Like, it may take fucking 100 times, but you hit that micro nanosecond window in a way that now 99% of other people will never be able to hit that window. And there's a satisfaction of knowing that, even though it's a virtual world. So that's where, like, I don't play the Dark Souls shit anymore, because those games are really, really difficult, and there's just too many of those situations where you have to hit that window. But like, I'll put another game on the highest difficulty setting so that it's more of those windows, because there's sometimes where it's like you don't want the entire game to be those types of windows, but those Dark Souls types games are like all microsecond windows where if you don't hit those windows, you're gonna fucking die, because that's basically how real life works.
Yeah. That's how, like, I just like a month or two ago finally got around to purchasing Sekiro and playing that. And on top of like going from Dark Souls to Bloodborne is already kind of awkward, because the controls are mostly the same, but there's a few buttons that are a little different. Then, going into Sekiro, where not only are there the little minor differences between like the buttons, so you'll get your muscle memory fucked with, but also just the mechanics are so much more different, because in Dark Souls, it's, you can parry enemy attacks and everything, but it's really a lot more, depending upon, if it's 1, 2, or 3, it sort of varies between spacing and getting like your iframes accurate when dodging attacks. And Bloodborne is more of a mixture between dodging and parrying, because parrying is a little bit easier to do in Bloodborne than it is in Dark Souls, in my opinion at least. There's like maybe a few more frames that enemies have where you can parry them as opposed to Dark Souls. But in Sekiro, as soon as I jumped into that fucking game, like, I'm pretty decent at parrying in the previous FromSoft games, but like also having to manage like not only just your regular health bar, which will only take just a few hits, but also your posture bar, which will take damage no matter whether you get hit or you block the attack. So you're just, you have like your posture bar, it can get filled all the way up, but as long as you are deflecting it just the right second, right like millisecond, your posture bar will never break. But as soon as you fuck up your timing, it gets broken and you have to dodge out of the way like really quick, or maybe you're not quick enough and you get hit. And just getting used to that like style of gameplay where it's almost like a rhythm game. And like, I normally play these games, since I've played them so much, I play them with the sound off, usually, like have YouTube or music or something on the background. But with Sekiro, especially since it's so new to me, like I have to have the volume on, because some of the audio cues that come from enemy attacks like are really important in getting like the parry windows down. And it's just, it was such a mind fuck, like getting used to that. Like, I still haven't even beaten it, I'm still stuck on the last boss because it's just so brutal.
You know, I had played that and I never finished it because I ended up selling that system and the game by proxy. But what you're talking about is one of those elements where I ended up like, as you're saying, if you, at first you have to have the audio on to get the timing right for the parries, but I like made sure I was able to visually do it because that's where I wanted to be. Like, I wanted to be good enough at parrying on that game so that if I die, it's not because I didn't parry right. And that's where I went through the training process with the audio off, and like there's like a flash that happens before they're about to hit you, and it's like I got seeing that flash, so then it's like I didn't have to depend on the audio signal. So it's things like that that I go through and do in these games, because when you're talking about, you know, the posture bar, for example, so I've done some Filipino martial arts stick training, like Eskrima, and it's like there's this element of when you're doing a horizontal, vertical, diagonal, or thrust strike with either a sword or a stick, there's only so many angles that you can do and keep your force at the proper like you keep your velocity at the proper trajectory so that when you hit your target, the force applied is what you're desiring and you don't lose any of the force transfer in the poor angle or the centripetal force loss. So there's all these things about keeping your proper posture and keeping around a certain axis when you're working with weapons, that when they have these posture bars, that's actually getting more in line with how these things will work in real life. So then that's where I'm like super appreciative of how they work, because it's like, as he's describing, a lot of these battles are ping pong-esque, where one person will strike and the other person will parry, and then the person who just parried throws a counter strike, and then that person parries back and then throws a strike, and it goes back and forth effectively until either someone makes a mistake or gets tired. And that's why the notion of somebody who can just trade parries back and forth without getting tired is something that's not realistic, but also why they put these gauges in the game as to why it's like, yeah, you can make parrying part of your strategy, but don't think you can just parry somebody over and over without getting tired and wearing out that muscle, because they're going to fucking see that and seize on it eventually. And if you don't do something else, you just can't parry as a strategy. And that's where, you know, with the machine learning, like I really enjoy being tested by these machines, because you have to then come with higher level strategy. Like in the Avengers game, the Taskmaster, it learns what you just did. So if you try to repeat moves, it blocks them. Taskmaster, you literally can't repeat sequences because the fucking machine is learning your sequences and expressing it through what is appearing to be somebody battling you back who learns your shit instantly. But it's done so well that if you try to do the same move twice, you're going to get blocked. Like it's good enough that it's learning your shit in such a quick, you know, machine enabled method that when they say you can't do the same sequence 2 times in a row, you can't fucking do the same sequence 2 times in a row. But that also transfers into a more creative martial artist. So that's where, you know, that's why I play these video games, to start helping me be more creative in how I'm expressing myself, but also doing it in a way that is in line with real world physics, because I can't, you know, they give me energy bars for my pairing on these video games, so I got to think about that shit in the video games the same way you do in real life. So again, that we're at a point where it's starting to you have to have so many skills in real life to actually be good in the virtual world. Like just a novice person isn't going to be able to go into Dark Souls and probably get past the first half an hour of gameplay. Like they're gonna.
I don't know. It took me like several hours to get past just like the first area in Dark Souls. Like I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, and that's a very common experience, which is why a lot of people end up putting it down. But that's the bell curve of gaming where. Or not even just gaming, but of anything where the top 5% of anybody who is doing something is just so much better than the lower 50%. It's like you don't think about it unless you're either in the top 5 or the lower 50, I would assume. Just because the gap is so vast. Like it's the same type of gap where when they had one of the Williams sisters playing like 3 regular dudes in tennis at once, and they couldn't return a ball. It's like, the people that go in and play Dark Souls, they're like the Williams sisters of gaming, and that's like, or the people that finish it rather, because it's like anybody can go in and start it, but yeah, the people that finish games like Dark Souls are the extreme.
That makes me feel powerful.
Part of it is
Sekiro is the only one I haven't really beaten yet because that one's just too new to me. I haven't really gotten accustomed to I've gotten to almost the entire game. I'm still not completely used to the battle system yet.
Yeah. Well, and that shit just frustrated me, like, as to why I was comfortable selling it and not getting it back, because there'd be points where I think I got to the second to last boss, and it was like, I think it's like a 20-minute fight, and you can't get hit more than twice in that 20-minute fight, and I beat the dude through that. And then it started going to another cutscene, and he transforms again. And I'm just like, fuck this. Like myself, fuck this. Like, I didn't get hit for 20 minutes. I don't need to go another, like, because if you die, then you go back to the beginning and have to do that 20 minutes all over. And it's like, I don't need to punish myself just to see. On YouTube, it was like the story wasn't even that compelling to me. I just love the visuals and love swordplay, to the point where I don't even know what the fuck is going on half the time, actually, because of the way the story's told. And that's not even necessarily that important.
That's the beauty of those games. You can just not pay any fucking attention to the story and still enjoy it very thoroughly, as long as you have some sort of masochism and love being punished.
Right, yeah. Because again, I think I must have put like 40 hours into it. Because there just wasn't a ton of swordplay games out that did swordplay well. So it's just, it felt like a combination of Assassin's Creed and Batman, where it definitely gave me the action aesthetic that I was looking for. But because the story was so abstract and like, it wasn't a bad story, but the way they told it is just non-linear. So I was like, too involved. And I have no problem with non-linear storytelling, but the way that theirs was executed was just like, I don't really care about these characters that much, so I don't really care about the ending that much. Like I've gotten the gameplay out of it. It was a great game. Like, again, this is all not to say like it was actually, you know, a really, really fun game, a great experience visually. Um, but that's where I'm looking at like Hellblade, and I'm getting, you know, the same sort of vibes, but I feel like the story is being told in a slightly more involved way that I don't know what's even happening yet. But again, I don't have to know what's happening to get involved with the story if it's being told in a, you know, a way that's involving. So I don't know if anybody's played Hellblade, but the way they introduce you to the person or the protagonist is like you're on your way to the first battle, but you're hearing the voices in her head, like discussing why she's going, and she doesn't even know why. So that's where not knowing why is actually part of this story, and she's trying to um, prove herself while simultaneously justify her actions, while also simultaneously not knowing 100% why she's doing it. So there's what they're doing with that story um, is very it's not 100% unique, but the way they're executing it makes it work really well for the medium. And I think that's where I don't think Sekiro like hit that um like they didn't make you care about the character because they didn't quite execute that aspect correctly, if as
Yeah.
I can tell.
Yeah, I'm when it comes to the Souls games and all that stuff, I'm less than I could not give any less of a shit about the majority of the characters, but it's more like I think that like the lore and world building is what I find the most interesting about it, but like the characters themselves are just kind of like I don't care. But when you're talking about Hellblade, are you talking about what Senua's Sacrifice?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, all right. I thought that's what you're talking about. I haven't played that yet, but I've heard a lot of really good things about it.
Yeah, I hadn't played it until recently because I don't know why, but I think it just didn't get a ton of marketing or something where it seemed like based on playing it, it seems like they put all the money in development, which I'm fine. I'm 100% fine with.
You know, I actually saw some marketing for it not too long ago, and I thought just because of the way they presented the main character's face, I thought it was a TV series that was going to be on like Netflix or something here in a couple of weeks, and I thought, okay, well, here's something I got to earmark so I can watch it when the season's done.
So when did you do that?
I saw that like maybe a week and a half ago.
So do you know when the game came out?
A week and a half ago.
2017, bro.
Oh no shit!
It's been out for a while.
Wow.
So that's what I'm saying. They put like nothing into marketing apparently.
Yeah.
That shit for like 3 years.
Well, how did I finally get some advertising for it then? After if it's 3 years old, 3.5 years old. Holy shit! Well, no, that's the thing. I saw it and I thought it's like, well, this is a TV series.
Well, I think they're close to actually releasing the second one now.
Okay.
So you may have even seen the trailer for the second one, but the first one got so little marketing that here we are 3 years later, and I'm just now getting around to it. But it's like the visuals and the gameplay is, you know, it's AAA, but I'm looking at it like it's not a common name for the protagonist.
Yeah.
It's a new character, so I'm just wondering if these executives have been told or been believing the lie that like you can't sell new characters or some shit, and that's why they didn't get any marketing budget. Because again, when you see the trailer or when you actually see the gameplay, it looks so real. I was blown away by some of the visuals that are actual in-game footage where it just looks like you're actually controlling a real person in a TV show at this point. And that's where it's super real to the point where, like I said, I think maybe Control might be the only other game that has gotten to that point of realism where I'm looking at it where Control, the video game, felt like what Lost season 3 and 4 was trying to do with their lore. The Control video game hit that note and hit it perfectly to the point where I'm dragging that game out as long as I possibly can. I'm like trying to save that shit as long as possible, and I'm going to play it at least twice. But the way that these video games are able to combine what is fictional worlds, real world actors, their performances, and then a story is like going to a different universe now, because we're no longer passive. Like we're not passive audience members. We're guiding these characters, even though this story was constructed, like, you know, however long before we actually get to interact with it. But the way they are constructing them now, we then get to create new stories and new experiences in real time, because they've given us that capacity to work in those worlds that way. And that's where, again, when we have like GTA 5 online, it's a real world at this point. There's only a few things that separate GTA 5 online from an actual universe, and those things are arbitrary as fuck at this point. World.
I've seen so many videos on YouTube of mostly of other people going on and just, you know, fucking around with people, but like real life role play servers in GTA 5 online, and, you know, some guy being like, hey, I'm selling this car, these are all the specs for it, and there's like cops that will actually read you your Miranda rights, and I'm like, this is crazy that this is an environment where we got to the point where like we can actually like do stuff like this, even though I think it goes a little too far. Like reading someone their Miranda rights in a video game is like, it's role play, but it's just like, I don't really get the appeal of that specifically.
Well, again, that's part of it, is like, it's real to some people because it's a real world now living, that, again, if you aren't part of it, it's going to seem strange and distant. But to these people, it's now so real that if you get pulled over, they're going to actually read you your Miranda rights. And that's why you know, even in the story mode, everybody stops at red lights. Everybody in the game stops at red lights. The only people who don't stop at red lights are police going on a chase or criminals, because you'll encounter criminals in the game that aren't you, where like, yeah, they just robbed somebody, or they just shot somebody, or they just did something, and then they're on the run from the cops, and you see this shit. Like, that's where sometimes I'll just walk around the game and see what's going on, because there's so much shit happening. It's like you're people watching at this point, because you might stumble upon somebody doing graffiti, and then the cops come and chase them down, and then the cops beat the shit out of them, and somebody starts videotaping the people, like the cops beating the shit out of this dude. That shit happens in a game. Like when shit starts happening in the GTA world, people start pulling out their cell phone cameras and recording that shit now. Like the actual PCs, they start reacting like people in the real world now. And that's because they program the NPCs to do real shit. So when you walk around a fucking San Andreas populated area, you're going to stumble on real world shit in a way where it's like, it's not for kids. As you know, as you're saying, it's too far in some ways, but the whole reason that is not for kids is because you can lose your mind in that reality, not being able to disconnect that you need to go eat in the real world and piss and shit in the real world and pay attention to your real world body, because this virtual world is real, and it's real enough to hijack your reward responses. Like, that shit is dangerous. And again,
Yeah.
I've probably put in a total of probably 200-300 hours into the GTA franchise over my life, maybe more than that. Um, and that's exactly why I know in these things being able to hijack your reward system, people have to really pay attention to the content and what's actually going in them, because I actually helped contribute to an academic study of GTA 4 as an examination of how masculinity in the context of gameplay can be good or bad. And what the study alludes to is like you actually have to be really, really intelligent and really educated for Grand Theft Auto to be satire. Because
Yeah.
you understand that these things are meant to mock the real world context, and like that they are meant to hyperbolize these things, then someone who may be in a child's mind state might take them seriously. So if they hear the talk radio on there, they think that dude is being serious. They think the views are serious. Or if they see this meth head dude subjugating people for drugs, they might think that that's okay because they don't understand the context of that being satire. So there's this element like, in order for GTA 5 or GTA 4 or 3 to actually be humorous, you have to actually be super smart. And that's why in the hands of someone who's not very smart, those things actually do become very dangerous, because they're not getting the subtext, they're not getting the jokes, and they're taking these things seriously.
Yeah, it's something I've also noticed about shows like for instance, something that's very near and dear to my heart. It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. That show is just, they play on like both sides of arguments whenever they talk about stuff like, gun control issues and all that. But like the majority of the time, they are just, it's satire of the stereotypical American dream, and that these people are all absolute garbage pieces of shit, but they're funny because you're supposed to be laughing at them. And like, I've seen so many like fans of It's Always Sunny that are like really alt-right or something and don't get that like this show is making fun of people like the alt-right. Like, it's making fun of you, how like you have to be a dumbass to enjoy the show. Like, yeah.
Despite the show making fun of the viewer.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah, and that's a perfect example, because I think the very first episode of that show is like the gang gets racist or something.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
That show is clearly satirizing horrible American culture and horrible American people in a way. It's only funny on the higher, like there's like so many jokes per episode. You only get 100% of the jokes if you understand that it's satire. Then if you look at it literally and think those people are meant to represent just America and not satirize America, you may get 50% of the jokes that are coming from those people that are meant to be horrible, but then those people are actually laughing at them as if they're not horrible. So it becomes this, it's a weird, like Archie Bunker thing where there's people who like Archie Bunker, and then there's people who like Archie Bunker for satirizing racists. And that's a weird place to be when both racist and smart people like something that is, then you have to look at that thing and say, what is this thing actually doing? Is it helping educate racists, or is this just giving non-racists a laugh while appeasing the other side, because it's like if we have this middle ground that somehow found a way to sell to both sides, that's fucked. I mean, it's the same type of shit that like selling weapons to both sides, because if you have something like It's Always Sunny where both sides can laugh at it because they both think that it's appealing to them, that shit is super dangerous. And it's like, you know, I've watched 10 seasons of It's Always Sunny. I think I stopped watching it at season 11. It's not that it got bad. I just got tired of it. It's still good. But
I think there is a little bit of a quality drop after season 10, but yeah, I've watched the rest of it since then. It's still fine, you know.
Yeah, it's fine. But what happened to my perspective of it is that inability for them to actually
Good God, 14 seasons.
Their audience, the racist audience, is why I'm like, I don't want to necessarily support this shit anymore, because I can't tell if you're helping them or not, and you're not being super open about it. So that's why I'm like, I'm cool. I'm gonna go give my energy to something else that's more clearly anti-racist, like John Favreau or fucking Dolly Parton, or somebody who's like openly anti-racist. I'm not gonna be too quick to consume shit from people who I can't tell from.
I personally, I mean, you know, there's a lot of people that are involved with like any given like medium, especially TV shows. I know that like I've seen like plenty of statements from Glenn Howard, the guy who plays Dennis, the worst character on the show, or one of the absolute worst, talk about like, you know, his views on like what the show is and like his political views, and he definitely does not seem like the kind of person who, you know, is trying to play both sides, so they come out on top, as Max says in an episode. But you know, it's more than just him. It's like, you know, there's like all of them contribute to the show in some way, like with writing or, you know, improv decisions. There's just so much stuff that goes into it, and I really hope that, you know, the creators of that, the writers and creators of the show have like the best in mind, and they're not trying to play the both sides, because that's not the vibe that I get. But it also is like, you know, there's so many people that are involved in the show. You never know like what's going on at the very, you know, top level of people influencing what happens in the show. So I see where you're coming from. It's kind of like it's hard to really like say for certain whether or not something is playing to both sides, or if it's just being satire to shit on, you know, these horrible aspects of society.
Yeah, because I don't know if you guys remember Jeff Foxworthy, but it was like he was clearly playing to rednecks.
100%.
Appearing to make fun of them. But then you get like the Larry the Cable guys he was actually satirizing them, playing both sides. So that's where I think they even did an episode about it on It's Always Sunny, where they're like alluding to it, where I'm like, you guys know this thing is an issue. So that's where I like know that they have left-wing political views, but I don't know if you guys just saw like the graphic where it's saying like 10% of people who identify with Democrats would be okay with like, there's like some level of acceptable losses from COVID. So that's where I'm like, you have this subversion of left-wing views to where people can then say, oh, I believe in social justice, but then they do like a blackface episode and then they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend anybody. It was just a joke. I'm actually a Democrat. I'm left-wing. Look at my voting record. But then they do shit. And that's where it's like, because then they're trying to get the racist vote or the racist money. And that's where it's like, I want to have faith in higher level satire, but wasn't born yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, especially with that particular episode of It's Always Sunny, where they do blackface, like they they very clearly acknowledge that like the purpose behind doing it in the episode is to like make fun of how insensitive it is to both do blackface as Mac does in the episode, and also and Dennis in the episode says, no, that's absolutely racist. But he goes and does a really stereotypical like black guy voice, and it started poking fun at like, at how insensitive these things are. But like at the same time, it's kind of, especially in like now in today's like climate, it's like it's questionable. At the very least, it's a very questionable decision of doing stuff like that. And I think it's best just to steer clear of stuff like that in general. But like, yeah, sorry, I'm kind of my brain gives out every now and then. All I'm saying is that I get the point of like what they were doing with that particular episode, but at the same time, it's like a pretty questionable like way to portray what they were trying to say.
Yeah. On that note, if
Exceptional Radio.
Yeah.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.